Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a flood devastates a luxury Texas neighborhood, a reclusive rancher becomes the unlikely villain. But as secrets surface and lies unravel, one man stands between a powerful HOA and the truth buried beneath the riverbed. Justice, like water, finds its way. I've lived on this land my whole damn life. 200 acres of Texas dirt, sweat, and stubbornness passed down from my grandfather, who broke his back making this place work. My dad kept it going, and now it's mine. I raise cattle, grow hay, and try not to get in anyone's way, mostly because I don't have neighbors close enough to make small talk with. Just the trees, the cows, and the steady hum of the wind through the grass. Out on the eastern edge of my property, there's a stretch of woods where a river cuts through, Cedar Creek. That creek's been here longer than any of us. It winds like a snake through the hills and down into the valley, where, about 8 years ago, a bunch of developers thought it'd be a grand idea to slap down a luxury subdivision they called Riverview Estates. Real fancy. Gated entry, oversized homes, boxwood hedges, and people who think cowboy boots are Halloween costumes. I never paid them much mind. They were downstream, and I was content with upstream. We coexisted, me with my mud and cattle, them with their wine nights and landscaping contracts. But this spring, nature decided to remind folks that rivers don't give a damn about real estate. It started with the rain, not your usual spring showers. No, this was a biblical deluge. 3 weeks straight of thick, heavy sky and water pouring like judgment. Cedar Creek swelled up and clawed past its banks. My side held. I'd seen it before. The creek rises, spreads into the low brush, and settles back. It's a breathing thing, a pulse. But downstream, that's another story. The news came through the grapevine first, local radio chattering about damage in Riverview. I figured some flooded basements, maybe a few soggy lawns. I didn't think much of it until I saw the footage. Streets turned to rivers, swimming pools full of brown water, and people in designer boots scooping out mud like the world had betrayed them. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. A week later, just as the sun finally broke through, I heard the sound of tires on gravel, not the usual delivery truck or neighbor borrowing a tool. This was heavier. I looked up from loading hay into the barn and saw a black SUV crawling up my drive, polished like it had never seen dust in its life. 4 people stepped out. 3 in suits, 1 woman in a pencil skirt and stilettos, which was a bold choice for a dirt driveway, and a man with a tablet in his hand. But the one who stood out was her. Late 50s, calculating eyes, perfect hair that probably cost more per month than my tractor insurance. She smiled like a cat watching a bird lose altitude. "You must be Mr. Rowe," she said. "I must," I replied, not offering my hand. She handed me an envelope. Heavy paper, gold lettering. Legal arrogance practically wafted off it. "I'm Pamela Cross," she said, "president of the Riverview Estates HOA. We're here to discuss the damages." I opened the envelope. First thing I saw, a number, $8 million. I let out a laugh, one of those dry, hollow chuckles that comes from somewhere just north of my liver. "You're shitting me." Pamela's face didn't flinch. "Our community suffered catastrophic damage. 40 homes were impacted. According to our legal team, the origin point of Cedar Creek lies within your property, which, under water responsibility statutes, makes you the controlling party of the waterway and, consequently, liable." I looked up from the paper. "Lady, that river's been running since before Texas was Texas. I don't control it. Hell, I barely control my cows." She smiled, cool and professional, like she just offered me a latte and a lawsuit in the same breath. "The fact remains, Mr. Rowe, that you own the land the creek begins on. Therefore, the HOA has determined you are responsible for any negligence that led to the flood event." "Negligence," I echoed. "You think I was supposed to plug the damn river with my tractor tires? There are civil options," she continued, like I hadn't spoken. "We're offering you a chance to resolve this amicably before we proceed to litigation. We understand you may not have $8 million in liquid assets." You could add 2 zeros, and I still wouldn't. "Then perhaps the sale of your land." I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Stop. Right there." She did, but the look in her eyes told me she was already 5 steps down the warpath. "You drove out here, in your fancy car, in your dry shoes, onto my land, to hand me this insult of a letter and tell me you're going to take my farm because the sky pissed on your community's tennis courts." Pamela folded her hands. "This doesn't have to be adversarial. Lady, I said, stepping closer, you built your plastic palace right in the floodplain of a natural creek, and now you want a scapegoat. Well, newsflash, I ain't it. You and your little council can shove this lawsuit where the sun don't shine. For a moment, there was silence. Even the wind paused. Then Pamela gave me a look I'd only ever seen once before, from a bull seconds before it charged. We gave you a chance, she said flatly. See you in court. They turned and left. Gravel sprayed from their tires on the way out. I stood there holding that ridiculous letter, staring at the number, $8 million. For rain. For a river I never claimed and couldn't tame if I tried. I looked out at the creek in the distance, calm again, winding through the trees like it always had. I spat in the dirt and muttered, well, ain't this going to be a fun goddamn year? I never thought I'd find myself in a lawyer's office, listening to legalese that sounded like it was written by someone high on printer ink. But there I was, 3 days after that ridiculous HOA ambush, sitting across from a man named Trevor Mays in a cluttered office above a feed store, trying to understand how anyone could sue me over a goddamn river. Trevor looked like someone who'd rather be fishing. Mid-40s, beard that didn't try too hard, flannel shirt under his blazer in the kind of calm tone that either means he's seen worse or he's really good at pretending. He had the letter spread out on his desk, eyebrows climbing with every line. So, I asked, arms crossed, how bad is it? He leaned back in his chair, tapped the side of his coffee mug, and sighed. Well, he said, it's complete bullshit. But it's expensive bullshit. That wasn't exactly comforting. They're claiming, Trevor went on, that because Cedar Creek's source point lies within your deeded property boundary, you're the controlling entity for the waterway. They've filed under a creative interpretation of civil liability law involving environmental negligence and hydrological management. It's shaky as hell, but they've hired real sharks, Goldstein, Barron, and Pike, out of Dallas. You don't bring them in for neighborly disputes. You bring them in to make people bleed legal fees until they settle. I let out a low whistle. What the hell kind of HOA has the budget to hire bloodsuckers like that? Trevor didn't answer right away. He flipped the pages again, frowning. Riverview Estates. I've heard rumors. Moneyed people. Dirty ties. And I know the judge they'll try to file in front of. Coleman. He leans pro-developer. I stood up, pacing the room. So what? They're trying to bleed me dry with paperwork. More or less, Trevor said. They're banking on you folding. On you panicking. Maybe agreeing to some kind of settlement just to make it stop. I laughed, but it wasn't a good laugh. More like the sound you make when you realize the wolves aren't howling at the moon. They're circling your house. I've got 2 loans on this place. One for the combine and one I took last year when the feed prices went nuts. I can't afford to fight $1 million firm over a river that doesn't even belong to me. That's the thing, Trevor said. Legally, it probably doesn't. Rivers like Cedar Creek, they're almost always classified as public waterways under Texas law. The moment it flows beyond your land, it becomes state jurisdiction. But proving that? It's not free. I sat back down, running a hand through my hair. So what's our play? We stall, he said. File motions, challenge jurisdiction, demand proof of damages, subpoena their hydrologist, make them work for every inch. And if they try to bring this to trial? Then we treat it like war. I didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the document again. That cursed number floating in bold font like a punch to the throat. $8 million for existing upstream. Trevor reached into a drawer and handed me a thick envelope. Here's a retainer agreement. You sign it, I'm your man. I won't sugarcoat it, Vincent. This is going to get messy. You're up against people who think the law is just another tool to take what they want. I took the pen, paused, then signed. Messy don't scare me. I'm a rancher. You ever try pulling a calf out of a britch berth in freezing rain? He chuckled. Fair point. By the time I got home, the news had already made its way to the local paper. Headline read, Local farmer sued for $8 million in flood dispute. There was a photo of my front gate, and just below it, a picture of Pamela Cross giving a statement in front of her HOA's community center, flanked by people in designer rain boots and sorrowful expressions. She was crying, or at least pretending to, saying things like, we trusted that those upstream would take care of their land, and we feel abandoned. The hell she did. The comment section was a mess. Half the town was siding with me. folks who'd known my family for generations, who understood what a floodplain meant. The other half, eating up her story like it was Sunday supper, saying things like, he should be held accountable, and if he owns the land, he owns the consequences. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and my boots still on, watching the moonlight glint off the creek in the distance, calm, unbothered, the way it always was, until someone got greedy. I wasn't just fighting a lawsuit, I was fighting a narrative, and Pamela was damn good at writing hers first. I don't like mysteries. Never did. Cows don't lie. Fences don't whisper. You feed the land and it feeds you back. That's the deal. But this lawsuit, it smelled wrong, like something rotting under fresh paint. After that ridiculous HOA press parade and the first round of legal posturing, I couldn't shake the feeling there was more to this than just spoiled rich folks pointing fingers. It wasn't just greed, it was strategy. Pamela Cross hadn't come after me because I was guilty. She came after me because I was useful, so I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I started digging. Not in the dirt, in the records. I drove 2 hours to the county archives in Denton. The clerk, a guy with a thinning ponytail and a name tag that said Doug, didn't ask many questions. Just pointed me toward a terminal and muttered something about scanned plats and building permits. I typed in Riverview Estates and started reading. 8 years ago, a company called Cross Development LLC submitted plans to build a luxury community along the lower banks of Cedar Creek. 150 homes, tennis courts, community center, custom stonework on every goddamn driveway. There was one line that stuck out on the initial application. Drainage mitigated via natural slope and standard runoff assumptions. Natural slope. That was code for, we're building in a flood zone and hoping no one notices until after closing day. I looked deeper. There had been an early environmental survey, one that clearly stated in dry bureaucratic language that the proposed site lay within a known floodplain. The report even included a decade-old hydrology study with a warning. Site has experienced significant overflow events every 12 to 15 years, corresponding with regional weather anomalies. I checked the date on that report. It was filed, acknowledged, and then mysteriously never included in the final permitting package. That's when the pieces started falling into place. The developer listed on the corporate documents, Robert Cross, husband of Pamela Cross. I leaned back in the chair and let out a slow, dark laugh. Of course, she wasn't coming after me because I had any real liability. She was trying to create it. To manufacture a villain upstream who could take the fall for what was essentially their own architectural Russian roulette. I printed out everything I could get my hands on. Application forms, permit histories, the missing flood report, even the goddamn promotional flyer that showed happy families standing 10 feet from a creek that history said would one day swallow their begonias. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. It was Trevor. Bad news, he said. They filed the full civil suit this morning. Trial prep starts next month. They're requesting a jury. Of course they are, I muttered. I got something for you, though. Meet me at the office. We spent the next 3 hours reviewing every document I'd pulled. Trevor's face went from confused to angry to impressed. They buried this, he said. They knew. Hell, if the buyers ever saw this flood report. Wouldn't matter, I said. If they get me labeled as the river owner, then the water becomes my problem, and Cross Development walks away clean. Trevor looked up. That's not just sleazy. That's criminal-level negligence. I leaned forward. What if I'm not the only one who smells the bullshit? Next morning, I drove back out toward Riverview Estates. I didn't go in, of course. I wasn't exactly on their welcome list. But I stopped at a gas station just outside the gated entrance and waited. Sure enough, around 8 a.m., the minivans and SUVs started pulling through, heading out for work. I approached one of the drivers at the pump. Mid-30s, frazzled mom look, coffee in hand. You live in Riverview? I asked. She nodded warily. Yeah, why? Did anyone ever tell you the neighborhood was in a floodplain? She blinked. Oh, what? I handed her a copy of the flood report I'd printed. You might want to take a look. She took it slowly, eyes scanning the front page. Her lips tightened. We weren't told anything. We just bought last year. Our basement's ruined. I gave her a nod and walked away. That was just the beginning. By the end of the week, I'd spoken to 5 more residents. 3 of them were already dealing with insurance hell. One was in a hotel with his family. Another had just finished replacing her flooring and was furious when I showed her what I'd found. Word started spreading, quietly. Inside the walls of the HOA's perfect little kingdom, something was splintering. And Pamela, she must have felt it too, because 2 days later, I got an official letter from the HOA's lawyers demanding I cease disseminating false or inflammatory materials regarding Riverview Estates and its board members. I didn't even read past the second paragraph, just smiled, folded the letter, and stuck it under my coffee mug. They'd kicked a bull, now they'd better pray it doesn't charge. If I thought Pamela was going to take all this lying down, I was dumber than I looked. She struck back. Not with lawyers this time, but with everything else in her toolbox. And I was about to find out just how deep that damn box went. It started with a knock on my door at 6:30 in the morning. I was half-dressed, coffee barely brewed, when I opened it to see two men in khaki uniforms with clipboards and sour expressions. "Vincent Rowe?" one asked. "That's what my mail says. We're with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We've received a complaint regarding improper waste disposal and water contamination from your property into Cedar Creek." I blinked. "You're joking." They didn't laugh. "May we inspect the premises?" I should have said no. I should have called Trevor first, but I had nothing to hide, and my pride got the better of me. "Fine, knock yourselves out. Watch your boots, though. Cows ain't exactly house-trained." They spent the next 2 hours poking around like raccoons in a trash pile, took water samples from the creek, scraped muck from my cattle pen, and asked questions that made it sound like I was operating a meth lab in the barn. By the time they left, they hadn't found a damn thing. One of them even mumbled that my runoff management was surprisingly clean. But that didn't matter. The report alone would be enough to raise flags with the county, enough to waste my time, drain my energy, keep me chasing ghosts. It didn't stop there. The next week, I got a call from my equipment lender, a new rep, aggressive tone. "Mr. Rowe, we've received a notice requesting review of your collateral structure, and there's concern regarding legal exposure due to an ongoing civil case. We may have to accelerate your payment schedule or seek new assurances." "Accelerate it?" I said. "I've never missed a payment in my life." "I understand," the guy said, "but if there's potential property seizure involved." "There isn't." "That's bullshit, and you know it." "Sir, I'm just reading the file." I hung up on him before I said something I'd regret. Later, Trevor confirmed it. Someone had bought up a portion of my outstanding note. Legally, they could agitate for stricter terms. It was a classic pressure tactic. "I'll bet my truck it was cross-development," Trevor said. "Or someone tied to them. She's trying to squeeze you financially, force you to either sell out or go under." It kept coming. My mailbox was suddenly full of notices. Health inspections, anonymous complaints, zoning violations that had never existed until now. I spent more time filling out responses and showing up to useless hearings than tending to my fields. And then came the story. A piece ran in the Dallas Morning Dispatch titled, "When the River Rises, Who Pays the Price?" It was a fluff piece, but dangerous. Full of emotional quotes from Riverview residents, drone photos of the flooded community, slow piano soundtrack playing in your head as you read. It framed the situation like this tragic act of God, and one stubborn farmer refusing to take responsibility. They didn't name me outright, but they didn't have to. They quoted HOA officials who said things like, "Certain upstream landowners have refused to even speak with us, and while our community suffers, we've been met with silence." Silence, my ass. I was in the middle of a legal cage match while these bastards played PR poker. I slammed the paper down and grabbed my phone. I called a local guy, Jordan, young freelance reporter who used to cover the rodeo circuit before papers started dying. I knew he had a good nose for lies and a healthy disrespect for wealthy assholes. "Jordan," I said, "you want the real story?" "You finally ready to talk?" he said. "I've been waiting." "Better," I told him. "I'm ready to show you something." I met him the next day and handed him copies of every document I dug up. Flood reports, missing permits, HOA board meeting transcripts, the works. His eyes widened. "You've got a damn expose here." "Just tell the truth," I said. "Let people see who's really lying." He promised to run it clean. Meanwhile, I kept pushing back, filed responses to every complaint, every inspection, every so-called violation. I called county reps, emailed board members, made noise. Let them know I wasn't just some old rancher they could walk over, but the worst blow came on a Thursday. I was at the co-op feed store when an old friend of my dad's, Pete Maynard, approached me, hesitantly. "You doing okay, Vince?" he asked. "As okay as a man being sued by rich lunatics can be." He looked uncomfortable. "Well, look, there's talk. Some folks think maybe you did something upstream. Maybe there's truth to what they're saying." That stopped me cold. "Pete, you've known me since I was 10. "I know, but people get scared. You know how it is." "Yeah, I did." That night, I sat on the porch again, this time without a beer. Just sat there in the dark, watching the creek shimmer under the stars. It hadn't changed. It didn't care. It flowed like it always had. But the world around it, that was starting to turn. Pamela wasn't just trying to take my land. She was trying to turn me into a villain. And it was starting to work. If there's one thing I've learned from decades of ranching, it's that fences don't build themselves. And neither does justice. You want something to stand, you dig the posts deep and brace for wind. I was done playing defense. If Pamela wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But this time, I'd be the one writing the rules. Trevor and I regrouped. We brought in a hydrologist from Austin, sharp guy named Dr. Jules Mercer. Wore bolo ties and had the voice of a preacher, but he knew water law better than the people who wrote it. Within an hour of walking the creek behind my barn, he was shaking his head and muttering, "This is textbook. Natural water course, non-navigable at source, fully public by state statute within the first 500 feet. Translation, it wasn't mine. Never was." The law didn't recognize rivers as private property unless they were man-made or fully enclosed, and Cedar Creek was as wild as the day was long. But that wasn't enough. We needed context, history, proof that this flood wasn't some freak event caused by me negligently. What, not putting a lid on the creek? That's where Dr. Hannah Brody came in, an environmental geologist out of Lubbock with more field hours than most oil surveyors. She pulled floodplain maps going back 60 years, tracked every significant overflow event. What she found was damning, and not for me. "There's a documented flood cycle in this valley every 12 to 15 years, she explained, laying out satellite images like tarot cards. This land, Riverview Estates, was historically classified as a high-risk flood zone. It's part of the natural drainage basin for the entire north quadrant of the county. She paused and gave me a look that was part pity, part disbelief. "And they built luxury homes on it." "Yup," I said, "with granite countertops and zero drainage planning." Between her report and Mercer's analysis, we were armed, but it still wasn't enough to stop Pamela. She wasn't suing based on truth. She was suing based on narrative. And if you let people control the story, they'll bury you in it. So I came up with a plan. Something underhanded, maybe. But after what she'd pulled, the inspections, the sabotage, the newspaper spin, I didn't feel bad. I created a new section on my ranch website, just a small page buried under the About Us tab. A mock-up, really, titled Private Water Rights Available, Cedar Creek Upper Flow Access. It read like a legal pitch to investors. Talked about controlling upstream flow, regulating recreational access, potential long-term monetization, all carefully worded, carefully baited. Then I dropped breadcrumbs, a few burner accounts in local forums, a quiet email sent to a known HOA lawyer I suspected was on Pamela's team pretending to be a concerned local, asking if the upstream rights were legit. I waited. 3 days later, I got a call. Number blocked. "Mr. Rowe, I represent a party interested in acquiring limited-use water rights from your upstream parcels. We'd like to know if you're open to negotiation." I played dumb. Didn't know you could sell water that isn't yours. "Well," the man chuckled, "some would say if it begins on your land, that gives you a certain authority, especially if there's historical precedent or implied access." "Interesting," I said. "Would you mind putting that in writing?" He hesitated. "Are you recording this call?" "Buddy," I said, "I'm a rancher. I still use a landline." He emailed me the next morning. Trevor nearly choked when he read it. They just admitted their whole legal argument is based on a theory they're trying to simultaneously discredit and exploit. Jesus, Vincent, you caught them fishing in their own poison. We printed it, notarized it, filed it with the court as part of our rebuttal, attached expert testimony, floodplain data, historic maps. And just like that, their house of cards started shaking. But the real crack came from inside. One evening, I was headed into town for supplies when I saw a man standing outside the Riverview Community Center with a cardboard sign, black marker, all caps, HOALIEDTOUS. I pulled over. His name was Dave Linwood, early 50s, ex-Navy, bought into Riverview 5 years ago. I just want people to know, he said, voice tight with frustration. We were never told about the floodplain. My daughter almost drowned in that goddamn basement. Now they're blaming you? He wasn't the only one. Within days, I started hearing from others, couples, retirees, young families, all realizing they'd been sold a dream built on soggy ground. Some of them still believed Pamela. Others were furious. One woman, Dana, a single mom with 2 kids and a ruined minivan, broke down in tears when I showed her the original floodplain maps. She wasn't angry at me. She was angry for me. This is scapegoating, she whispered. They knew. They all knew. I wasn't alone anymore. The wind was shifting. And Pamela, she was about to find out what happens when the people you think you control decide to look behind the curtain. By the time September rolled in, the air got sharper, and so did I. The days of playing the dumb country bumpkin were over. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case, brick by brick, the same way my grandfather had built this house, with calloused hands and no shortcuts. The town wasn't whispering about me the way it used to. Something had shifted. People who'd looked at me sideways in the feed store were now offering quiet nods. A few even stopped to say, "You hanging in there?" One woman handed me a pie. Pecan. No note. Just a silent "we got your back" in crust form. Jordan, the freelance journalist I'd tipped off, published his piece. And Lord, did it hit like a hammer. Front page of the Denton Weekly, syndicated to 3 other small papers in the state. Headline: Flooded with lies. How a luxury HOA built on a floodplain found its fall guy. He didn't hold back. Quoted the flood reports, the buried environmental warnings, the coincidental omission of risk assessments in real estate disclosures. Called out cross-development by name. Even included a section titled "The Farmer and the Fallacy," where he walked readers through Pamela's ridiculous claim that I owned the river like it was a goddamn private well. Pamela didn't respond publicly, but behind the scenes, she was scrambling. Residents started demanding emergency HOA meetings. Word was there was shouting, accusations. One guy posted a blurry photo on Facebook showing Pamela walking out of the clubhouse with red eyes and a stiff jaw, her usual icy control cracking under pressure. I heard, through Dana, who'd become an unofficial informant, that Pamela tried to silence internal dissent by invoking non-disclosure clauses in their HOA charters, clauses that no one had ever noticed before. One homeowner had the gall to reply, "Lady, this ain't a casino NDA. My living room turned into a fish tank. I'll speak if I damn well want to." But Pamela still had one card left to play: fear. And she was damn good at using it. 3 homeowners who'd been talking to me suddenly went silent. One sent me a message. "Sorry, got a warning letter from the HOA. Said I'm in violation of decorum standards, whatever that means." Trevor laughed when I showed him. "Means they're panicking." We filed a motion to compel discovery. We wanted everything. HOA, meeting notes, emails, permitting documents. We didn't expect to get it all, but the judge approved a partial review, and that's when we struck oil. Buried in a folder titled Cross Holdings Internal Pre-Sales Packet, we found a draft memo from Robert Cross, Pamela's husband, stating, in plain language, floodplain designation is a risk but manageable. If buyers request documentation, refer to General Soil Report and avoid direct reference to FEMA overlays. Trevor nearly jumped out of his chair. That's fraud. That's intentional. Think Pamela knew. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. She wrote the memo's legal disclaimer. Her name's in the goddamn footer. We'd crossed the line from negligence to something meaner. They hadn't just gambled on Mother Nature. They'd stacked the deck and hoped no one noticed the cheating. Meanwhile, the legal noise wasn't dying down. Pamela's lawyers tried to get our expert witnesses thrown out, citing bias. But Mercer and Brody were solid. They'd done federal work. They weren't going anywhere. I doubled down, called the county engineering office. Requested flood insurance claims filed by Riverview residents. Turns out, nearly 40 families had already filed and listed undisclosed floodplain location as part of the reason. Some even noted that their insurers were pursuing the developer for omission. Trevor rubbed his temples. They're suing the Crosses on one side, while the Crosses are suing you to shift the blame. It's a goddamn trapeze act. And it's falling apart. The final nail came from someone unexpected. A former construction supervisor named Joe Logan reached out, said he worked on the Riverview project in its early days and had been let go when he raised too many questions about drainage systems. I told him straight up, he said when we met, that you don't build slab homes in a runoff basin without a proper levee or culvert system. They told me to shut up and stick to pouring concrete. Joe had records, internal reports, emails, even pictures of the original site. Before it was flattened and landscaped into suburbia, we added it all to the file. By the end of the month, Trevor had a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. We scheduled a pre-trial hearing, and our case was airtight. But Pamela wasn't done. She requested a private meeting, said she wanted to avoid dragging this through the mud. Her words. I met her at a lawyer's office in town. Neutral ground. She looked tired, but not beaten. Still had that coiled venom behind the eyes. You're not going to win what you think, she said, arms folded. Even if the lawsuit is dropped, the damage is done. You think a man like you can survive a legal battle like this? The reputational cost alone. I cut her off. You buried a flood report, sold a false promise, and now you're mad the river finally came to collect. She leaned in, voice low. You don't know what we're really protecting here. I stared at her. Lady, all I see is a house of cards, and the wind's picking up. She stood. Then I'll see you in court. And just like that, it was official. The next time we met wouldn't be behind closed doors. It would be in front of a judge. The morning of the trial, the air was still. Not quiet. Still. Like the land itself was holding its breath. I'd stood in courtrooms before. Traffic tickets, zoning nonsense. But never like this. Never with $8 million hanging over my head like a damn guillotine. Trevor looked sharp. New jacket, pressed shirt, zero smile. He told me once, the scarier I look, the fewer interruptions I get. Worked like a charm. Pamela showed up late. Not dramatically so, but enough to make people look. Tailored suit, calm face, not a hair out of place. But I could see it. A twitch at the corner of her mouth, a tightness in her jaw. She knew this wasn't going to be easy anymore. Judge Hollander was a straight shooter, old school Texan, no tolerance for grandstanding. He opened proceedings with a reminder. We're here to determine liability based on fact and law, not on feelings or fancy talk. I almost smiled. The HOA's lawyers went first. They made their pitch. Mr. Rowe owns the headwaters of Cedar Creek, failed to manage its risk, and is therefore financially responsible for the damage done downstream. They had diagrams, quotes from hydrology textbooks, and photos of the flood damage in Riverview. All very polished, all very dramatic, but not true. When it was our turn, Trevor stepped up like a preacher with gospel in his briefcase. He started simple. Cedar Creek is a naturally occurring, non-navigable waterway under Texas law. It is classified as public domain once it crosses private property lines. Mr. Rowe cannot control, redirect, or be held liable for it, legally or physically. Then he brought in Mercer. The man didn't flinch under cross. Laid out the case like a river map. The flooding was not caused by anything upstream. It was caused by the natural flow of water into an improperly developed floodplain with zero effective mitigation infrastructure. Next came Dr. Brody. She spoke with the calm of someone who'd seen dozens of towns make the same mistakes. Building in a documented flood basin without engineered drainage or disclosure is reckless. No amount of landscaping or homeowner blame can change hydrology. Then Trevor lowered the boom. He showed the jury the Cross Holdings memo, read it aloud. The courtroom went silent when Pamela's name was read as the author of the risk disclaimer. And then, for the killing blow, he brought up Joe Logan, the former construction supervisor. When Joe took the stand and testified that the drainage plans were intentionally ignored to cut costs, the jury leaned in. But Pamela, she stayed still. Too still. At the lunch break, something unexpected happened. I was walking back toward the courthouse when a man in a gray suit intercepted me outside the steps. Late 40s, clean cut, nervous eyes. Mr. Rowe, he said, low and fast. I represent a private party with interest in a quick resolution to this dispute. They're willing to offer an off-record settlement to make this disappear. No admission of guilt. Cash settlement. You walk away with your farm intact. I stared at him. Let me guess. Private party wears pearls and files lawsuits on HOA letterhead? He hesitated. Let's not be adversarial. Oh, I passed that exit a long time ago. Then came the twist. She also asked me to remind you, he said carefully, that you wouldn't want the county reassessing certain structures on your property. You've had some informal outbuildings added in recent years, haven't you? I froze. They'd been snooping, trying to use the fact that I'd added a new equipment shed without full permitting as leverage. Technically a code violation, one that could bring fines, maybe even hold up my insurance. Pamela's final card, blackmail. I stepped closer. Tell your boss she should have built her house on stone, not sand. And if she wants to play dirty, she better dig deeper. Back in court, Trevor caught the vibe immediately. What happened? Pamela tried to blackmail me through a proxy. He stared. You serious? She's desperate. When the session resumed, Pamela took the stand. Trevor was surgical. Mrs. Cross, were you aware of the floodplain classification of the development site prior to construction? She hesitated. I was given a number of environmental reports. Yes or no, please. Yes. And were you involved in the legal structuring of Cross Holdings homeowner purchase agreements? I reviewed some documents. Yes. He showed her the memo. Did you write this? A long silence. Yes. Did you inform buyers of this risk? They were informed that the area met residential standards under local code, which you helped write, correct? Yes. That was it. The moment. The whole room felt it, like the dam had cracked. Trevor ended with one sentence. You didn't just sue an innocent man, you tried to bury your own mess under his barn. The judge recessed for deliberation. An hour later, the gavel dropped. Case dismissed with prejudice. Pamela's lawsuit, dead. Trevor stood up, shook my hand, and said, Told you, messy don't scare us. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I slept in. First time in months. No subpoenas, no inspectors, no fake water rights buyers sniffing around like vultures. Just me, the breeze, and the slow rustle of cedar branches dancing over my porch. The lawsuit was gone, dismissed, buried, legally dead, and cremated. But victory doesn't taste like fireworks. It tastes like silence. And coffee that doesn't go cold because you're on the phone with lawyers all day. Trevor stopped by before noon with a bottle of whiskey and a letter in hand. This, he said, dropping the envelope on my kitchen table, is your cherry on top. It was the judge's final ruling on our countersuit. Pamela and the Riverview HOA were ordered to pay $180,000 for defamation, malicious prosecution, and reputational harm, not just the HOA. Pamela personally. Trevor grinned. Turns out judges don't like being used to launder real estate fraud. I didn't celebrate right away. Maybe part of me was still bracing for one more sneak attack, one more drone photo, one more rigged inspection, but it didn't come. Instead, I got a different kind of visit. Dana and Dave, two of the Riverview residents I'd spoken to, stopped by the ranch with a group of others. A few had kids in tow. One brought a homemade casserole. I wasn't sure if they were here to say thank you or sorry. Turned out it was both. Dana shook my hand, eyes serious. We've filed a formal petition to remove Pamela as HOA president. Majority signed already, Dave added, and we're joining the class action suit against Cross Development. You were right all along. Damn shame it took a flood to prove it, I said. It took you, Dana replied, standing up when everyone else was scared. I didn't know what to say. I'm not a hero, I just didn't like being lied about. By the end of the week, news broke. Cross Development was officially under investigation for fraudulent disclosure practices. The state attorney general's office got involved. Pamela's husband filed for bankruptcy. The company dissolved within 2 months. Pamela tried to hold on, but the HOA board voted her out. Her resignation letter leaked online. Cold, formal, no apology. She and Robert sold their house and left the state by Christmas. No one threw a going-away party. And me? I reinvested the settlement money into the farm. Upgraded irrigation, replaced the old Ford, finally built that equipment shed with all the permits signed, sealed, and notarized, just in case someone came sniffing again. Cedar Creek kept flowing, calm, unbothered. It had outlasted settlers, storms, droughts, and fools with God complexes. It would outlast me too. But now, at least, it didn't have to carry the blame. Sometimes I sit out by the creek and watch the water go by. Neighbors still talk about the trial like it was some kind of Western showdown. Good guy wins, bad guy runs off into the desert. But real life ain't a movie. There's no credits, no theme song, just peace. And the knowledge that when they came for me with lies and lawsuits, I stood my ground, because here's the thing they never understood. You can sue a man, you can smear him, you can bury him in paper, but you can't own a river.